welcome to Preparing for Ordinary Sunday 26, still journeying through Mark. Unless you're observing St. Michael and all angels, and we'll come up with that another year. Mark 9, towards the end of the chapter. And Kelvin, you're immersed in background materials. But first, welcome Peg, and welcome Alec. Welcome Kelvin. Kelvin.
This is a passage which is a bit heavy, really. It's one of those passages where the doctrine of hell rests firmly. But you've got to remember the context of this when you're thinking of this from verse 42 on. After the transfiguration, Jesus comes down from the mountain, and then Mark is careful to say that he avoids the crowds even more than usual. And all of the material from between the transfiguration and the events of the Passion are directed firmly at the apostles. So this is instructions to the leaders of the church. And I don't think they're the basis of sort of universal Christian doctrine, but they're there for us who are entrusted with church leadership. So he comes down off the mountain, and then there's a story which is about the disciples not being able to affect the casting out of a demon. And then in this passage, we've got a kind of a parallel where the disciples see somebody else casting out a demon and forbid them. And Jesus says, no, anybody who's not against me is for me. And then he goes on this passage about how careful we need to be in ministry to protect the innocent, and how if the innocent end up in dire spiritual straits because of our ministrations, we are kind of responsible for it. And he uses then the well-known metaphors about the fire that never goes out and the worm that never is satisfied. And from these, people have built a doctrine of everlasting torment, but I don't think it's quite justifiable. We have a fire in our drawing room, which at this time of the year never goes out. And that's not to say that the wood we put into it is always there. I wish it was. But the wood perishes. This is a picture of not of everlasting torment, but of destruction. And these are metaphors that Jesus is using, and there is a tendency for Christians to heave a sigh of relief when somebody like me says, oh, well, this is metaphorical language. That people say, oh, it's only a metaphor. But only is not a justifiable word. It's a metaphor because Jesus is describing realities which are hard to describe in any other way. But he's describing realities of the utmost importance. And if you want to know whether there's a hell or not, just go and ask the people of Gaza. They'll tell you. And Jesus is reminding us as Christian ministers that our actions and our responsibilities to those who are entrusted to our care are of the utmost importance, and in fact can sometimes be a matter of life and death.
Kelvin, thank you so much for that. And a sort of confession, as a Christocentric universalist, I find my heart strangely warmed by those words. And of course, on the day we're recording this, we remember too the people of Lebanon who've been shattered by the pager explosions across the Middle East. Well, that's a bit sobering, but there are going to be challenges here. Alec, where do you find them?
Pretty much in the place that Kelvin's mentioning, actually. I mean, throughout my entire ministry, I've always been conscious of the reading that we had just a couple of weeks ago, where don't become a teacher too quickly because they will be judged more severely than others. And I think it's something which we, as people who preach and who lead worship and who offer ministry in communities of faith, need to remember that we have this huge responsibility to do the very best for those that we actually work with. Now, it shouldn't put us off, because if we're called, and that's the way that it is. But for me, I've always worked hard to attempt to be careful of what I say and the impact it may have on the others that are there with me and living with me in the faith community.
It's a grave responsibility, and thank you for highlighting that as well. I think it's absolutely in line with Kelvin. Peg, for you, the challenge?
Well, in first reading it, there were three challenges that stood out to me. The one was the advice for physical mutilation, which Kelvin has beautifully talked about. And the hyperbole that Jesus is talking there is, again, reiterating that if we are to lose our life, we will gain it. If we work for God and give of ourselves and lose the ego and that we are to gain our life with God. And the second one was that description of hell, which has fed so many non-Christian people with this idea of our brutal and punishing God, which in actual fact, I think, well, for me, my understanding of hell is to not be in a state of relationship with God. And that separation is even worse for me than an eternal fire or being hit with pitchforks or whatever. So yeah, that was another challenge. But the one that challenged me and got me really thinking was, what does it mean to be the salt of friendship mean? The purification of ourselves to actually stop arguing about who's the greatest and to be humble as children and to stop the divisions about you're in and I mean you're out and I'm in kind of thing. Those are the purification of our friendships. And then from that, we can have peace with our neighbors and others. So I've gone through all my challenges and the good news in one. So there you go.
Beautiful concepts to explore. So, Kelvin, you've given us a lot, but personally, challenge?
Oh, the challenge is because I'm a person who has been entrusted with sort of gatekeeping responsibilities in the church and organising things. And here in this passage, we've got all the things that church people argue about. Who's the greatest? And then we've got people who are inside the church who can't do anything, and people outside the church who seemingly can. And so, where does that leave us? And we've just had a synod in our diocese, and I'm nearly 50 years of attending synods, and these seem to be the kinds of challenges that are still occupying us now. And so, yes, that's a challenge for me.
Very much so. Thank you. Well, we might feel a little heavy for a moment. Let's ask you, Peg, for some good news as you read this passage.
The good news for me was the line, for anyone not against us is for us, which is much easier to grapple with and take in than the one he directed at the Pharisees, if you're not for me, you're against me. I think it's referring to anyone in sympathy with our ministry, with Jesus' ministry, with God's love in the world, and is for us, isn't working against us, is working with God. That's my good news.
Absolutely, it's so important. We see so much good done in the name of other outlooks, not even
exactly.
It's wonderful to hear that and to be affirmed in that. Kelvin, for you, good news?
My good news is Jesus is again doing all manner of boundary breaking, and the Spirit of God seems to be bursting out everywhere. That's always good news. But the good news too is that despite all that he says, he trusts us enough with the church, and that's an extraordinary thing. He knows how broken and fallible and foolish we are, and yet he still trusts us.
Deeply heartwarming. Yeah, thank you. Alec?
He stole mine. I mean, it's the sense that so if we get it wrong, we preferably have a millstone put around our neck and thrown in the sea. But it is the fact that Jesus actually asks us to put ourselves in that stupid place and to be there and to be part of his ministry and his love and his teaching and his trying to do all this stuff. And how can that not be good news? We are trusted and loved that much that God wants us to put ourselves in that place and to do that stuff. And I love that.
Yes, indeed. And again, it warms the heart, and to be participating in that love of God.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's ask Kelvin for then some so what in all this exploration.
So what for me is the vulnerable ones who may be looking to me for an example and for teaching, and my need to be as careful as I can with these treasures that have been entrusted to me.
Indeed. Alec, so what?
Well, for me, I guess one of the obvious so what's at the moment is with the Royal Commission stuff around that we have to get our stuff together as people within the church, and as a faith community as a whole. We have to stop doing all the stuff which annoys us at synods, where we bicker and bite and all the rest of it. And we need to get down to figuring out how to love not only ourselves, but the world, which is what God asks us to do. And I think that, for me, I think is the challenge, is that we need to figure out individually, but corporately, how we stop being so self-obsessed with our own stuff and our own needs and our own, I know this is the truth because I believe it, and actually listen and be engaged with and involved with loving people in a way which actually transforms their lives.
Thanks, Alec. And so sagely put, if I can put it that way, because absolutely. Peg.
Okay. So what? It is to live in peace with one another. I'm fairly careful about not excluding others in what I say, but I must watch it also in what I do and what I allow to be said around me as well, because I think that if I don't want to be complicit in exclusion either by not challenging it. But I think the other part was the meeting of the needs of the people, the here and now. I go back to that beginning of that passage where if someone gives you a glass of water because you follow me, they will receive a reward. But it's about meeting the needs of people where they are in that moment. And I think this whole passage brings out those two commandments of loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself.
It's a profound exposition of that, isn't it? And all that you have said, it's a deeply rewarding passage with this little bit of digging. So thanks for digging with me and breaking this passage open, if I may mix my metaphors, and let's see where it takes us this Sunday. Thanks for joining me.